The desert sun burned low, stretching long shadows across the red earth. Winds stirred through the tall grass, whispering against the old wooden fence that marked the edge of the ranch. Dust clung to every surface, from the cracked porch boards to the hem of her faded blue dress. She stood there, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the horizon where the heat shimmered like glass. Somewhere out there, beyond the line where the earth met the sky, trouble was coming. She could feel it long before she saw it. A single rider broke through the haze, tall, dark, and steady on his horse. The animal's hooves beat a slow, heavy rhythm against the ground. It wasn't a rancher's gait or a drifter's slouch. There was purpose in it, a kind of quiet command that drew every eye and silenced every breath. The man rode closer, his face half hidden beneath the shadow of his hat and the red dust of the plains. But his eyes, sharp as an eagle's, caught hers before he even stopped. That was the moment her heart kicked hard against her ribs. Though she didn't yet understand why, he dismounted without a word. His boots met the ground with a weight that seemed to shift the air around them. The stranger carried himself like someone used to leading men or fighting them. His skin was sun-darkened, his hair long and bound with a strip of leather, and around his neck hung a small carved token shaped like a hawk. She had seen Apache warriors before, but never one who looked like him. He wasn't just a fighter. There was something ancient in his stillness, something that didn't belong to this restless land. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said quietly. His voice was deep, low, carrying the rough edge of command. "Not with what's coming." She tried to steady her voice. "I'm not afraid of men who hide behind bandanas." He studied her for a moment. "You should be. But I'm not talking about them." Behind them, the ranch house door creaked open. The foreman stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Everything all right, miss?" The warrior turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "No," he said before she could answer. "Not yet." The foreman frowned, but didn't argue. He sensed the same thing she did. Danger wrapped in silence. The woman, though young, had already learned that life in the frontier demanded more grit than grace. She had taken charge of the ranch after her father's death, holding onto every acre with sheer will. The men respected her, but some whispered that a woman had no place running cattle and facing outlaws. She ignored them. She had faced drought, debt, and deceit, all with her chin high and her back straight. But now, standing before this stranger, she felt something she hadn't in years: uncertainty. "What is it you want?" she asked finally. His gaze didn't waver. "Protection," he said. "For you, for your land, for what's coming." Her laugh was dry. "And why would a stranger care about my land?" "I'm not a stranger," he said simply. "Not to this place. My people walked this land long before your fences cut through it." Something in his tone softened her. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. And it stirred a quiet guilt she couldn't name. Before she could reply, a distant thunder rolled through the canyon. It wasn't the sky that made the sound. It was horses. Many of them. The ground trembled faintly beneath her boots. The warrior turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing. "They found you faster than I thought." "Who?" she asked, her heart racing. He looked at her again, and for the first time she saw the faint scar that ran from his jaw to his neck. "Men who take what they want. They've been tracking your wagon shipments for weeks." She took a step back. "You knew this? And you came here?" "I came here to stop it." The wind rose, whipping strands of her hair across her face. In that moment, everything around her, the silence, the dust, the fading light, seemed to hold its breath. He reached into the saddlebag and pulled out a rifle, its metal glinting dull gold in the sunset. "If they see me here, they'll think twice. But if they see you with me," he paused, "they might think we're married." Her mouth parted slightly. "Married?" He nodded once. "Say I'm your husband," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "If they believe that, they won't touch you. Not while I'm here." For a heartbeat, she couldn't find her words. Her mind spun between disbelief and something else, a flicker of trust she didn't want to admit. "That's madness," she whispered. "They'll never believe it." "They will," he said, looking at her squarely. Because I will make them believe it. There was no boast in his tone. Only certainty, the kind that comes from a man who has faced death and returned standing. She searched his face, trying to find a lie. There wasn't one. Only a strange mixture of defiance and something gentler, something almost protective. The sound of horses grew louder. The horizon darkened with the silhouettes of riders approaching fast. The foreman cursed under his breath and ran to the barn, yelling for the hands to grab their guns. The warrior didn't move. "You don't have time to think," he said softly. "Say it." Her breath came short. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes met hers, fierce and unflinching. "Because you remind me of someone I once failed to protect." For a moment, the world around them faded, the noise, the wind, the dust, until all that was left was that raw confession hanging between them. Then, from beyond the ridge, came the echo of gunfire. The riders were closer now, close enough for her to see the flash of metal and the ragged flags they carried. Her hand shook as she turned to face them. The warrior stepped forward, placing himself between her and the oncoming danger. "Stay behind me," he ordered. She should have refused, she always had, but something about the steadiness in his voice made her obey. She took one step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The riders drew near, their leader raising his rifle in greeting, a mocking grin on his face. "Didn't think we'd find you so soon, miss," he called out. "But you've got company, I see." His eyes shifted to the warrior, narrowing. "You her man?" The warrior didn't flinch. His voice carried clear and strong across the yard. "Yes," he said. "I'm her husband." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. The men hesitated, murmuring among themselves. The woman felt her stomach twist, not from fear alone, but from the strange finality in the way he said it. The leader laughed. "That's so? Then you won't mind dying for her?" The warrior's hand moved slowly toward his belt knife, but his voice remained calm. "If that's what it takes?" The woman's pulse roared in her ears. The world seemed to tilt as the men began spreading out, circling like wolves. She could feel the weight of what she had just stepped into. A lie that might save her life or cost her everything. The wind carried a sharp scent of rain and gunpowder. Somewhere behind her, the ranch hands were shouting orders, scrambling to prepare. But all she could see was the warrior's back as he stood unmoving, his shoulders squared against the gathering threat. She wanted to speak, to call him back, to tell him he didn't have to do this. But before the words could form, the first shot rang out, slicing through the dry evening air. The horses reared. The men shouted. The warrior spun, his movements a blur of precision and power. The woman gasped, her hands gripping the porch railing as the world erupted into chaos around her. And just as the smoke began to rise, turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see his eyes again. Calm, unshaken, and filled with a promise she didn't yet understand. That was the moment she realized her life would never be the same again. The gunfire echoed across the valley, each shot cracking like lightning through dry wood. Dust rose thick and choking as horses screamed and men shouted in confusion. The woman could hardly breathe, her fingers gripping the post until her knuckles turned white. The Apache warrior moved through the chaos like he'd done it 100 times before, fast, calm, and sure. He fired once, then twice, never wasting a bullet. When the smoke cleared enough for her to see, 2 of the riders were down, and the rest had scattered behind the rocks near the creek. Her heart thudded so loud she thought they'd hear it. The foreman ran to her side, reloading his shotgun with shaking hands. "Who in the blazes is that man?" he shouted over the noise. She didn't answer. She didn't know how to. All she knew was that he had stood in front of her when the shooting began, not behind. He had lied for her, and in that lie, she suddenly felt safer than she had in years. The warrior ducked behind a trough, reloading his rifle. The wind caught his long hair and flung it across his face, but his eyes never left the ridge. "They're testing us," he called out. "They want to see how many we are." The foreman cursed and crouched beside him. "They'll be back with more. You just signed us up for a war." The warrior didn't flinch. It was already coming. When the last of the riders disappeared beyond the ridge, the ranch fell silent again. The air smelled of gunpowder and burnt wood. A few chickens clucked nervously near the barn. She could still hear the distant rumble of hooves fading into the canyon. The warrior stood and walked toward her, his rifle resting easily in his hand. Up close, she could see the dust streaking his face, the faint scar that disappeared into his hairline, and the calm strength in the way he carried himself. "You should pack what matters," he said. "They'll be back before sunset." Her voice trembled more than she wanted it to. "And where do you expect us to go?" "This is my home." He studied her for a moment before answering. "Home won't matter if you're dead." The words struck deep. She looked past him to the fields her father had worked until his hands bled. Every post, every trail, every corral held memories she couldn't just abandon. Yet, when she met his gaze again, she saw no cruelty, only truth. The foreman stepped between them. "Miss, I say, we listen to him. He's got the look of a man who's been through worse." She nodded slowly. "Fine, but before we go anywhere, I want to know who I'm trusting." The warrior's eyes darkened slightly, not with anger, but with memory. "My name wouldn't mean much to you," he said. "Your people called my father Red Hawk. He led our band before the soldiers took him." Her breath caught. She'd heard the name before, whispered among settlers when the fires burned high and the stories ran dark. Red Hawk had been a name that carried both respect and fear. "I remember that name," she said quietly. "They said he led a raid near the border." His jaw tightened. "They never tell what came before. They took our land first, our horses, our people. My father fought to keep what was his." The air between them grew heavy. She wanted to speak, but didn't know how. "Finally," she said, "and now you're here, helping a woman whose family owns land that once belonged to yours." He met her eyes and gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe that's why I'm here." By late afternoon, the ranch hands had packed what they could: food, ammunition, blankets. The warrior moved among them, checking the horses, marking the horizon, listening more than he spoke. The men watched him carefully, unsure if they should trust him or fear him. But when one of the younger hands stumbled while saddling a horse, the warrior caught the reins before the animal could bolt. His touch was calm, steady, and the horse quieted instantly. From then on, no one questioned his place. The woman found herself watching him too often. There was something about the quiet way he moved, the weight of his silence, that made her want to understand what he wasn't saying. He wasn't like the men she'd grown up around. Loud, proud, quick to talk. He carried his history like a shadow, and it made her feel both curious and uneasy. When the sun began to sink, they mounted up. The sky bled orange and gold across the desert, the air cooling fast. The warrior led the way, guiding them along a trail that wound through the canyon. The woman rode beside him, her mind racing with questions she didn't dare ask. "How did you know they'd come?" She finally said, "I've been following them for 3 days," he replied without turning. "They took cattle from a ranch south of here, killed 2 men, burned the rest." Her throat went dry. "And you followed them here to warn me?" He nodded once. "They move fast. I thought I'd reach you sooner." She stared at him, studying the sharp lines of his face in the fading light. "You risked your life for strangers." His tone was quiet. "No one is a stranger when the same men hunt us." The wind whistled through the rocks, carrying the faint cry of a hawk. The woman looked back at the ranch, now a dark shape against the horizon. She wondered if she would ever see it again. They rode until night fell, stopping near a dry riverbed where the trees grew thick. The men built a small fire, careful to keep it hidden under the brush. The warrior sat apart from the others, cleaning his rifle. The firelight flickered across his face. Catching the reflection of his eyes as he watched the shadows dance, she walked over with a tin cup of water and handed it to him. "You haven't eaten," she said. "I will," he answered softly. "When I know it's safe, you always live like this?" He looked up at her, and for the first time, a hint of sadness crossed his features. "There's no peace for men like me?" "Not anymore." A quiet stretched between them. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there had to be a place for people like him, But even she knew how cruel the world could be. After a while, she said, "You said they'll be back? What do they want?" He poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "They want gold, or cattle, or blood. They don't care which. And what about you?" She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want?" He lifted his eyes to hers, steady and unreadable. "To keep you alive long enough to find out why they came for you?" The words unsettled her. "What do you mean?" "I heard them talking before they found your trail," he said. "They mentioned a woman who refused to sell her land. Said she was guarding something that wasn't hers." Her heart jolted. "That's a lie." "I believe you," he said. "But lies like that have a way of becoming reasons for men to kill." The flames flickered lower, throwing his shadow long across the dirt. She stared into the fire, thinking of her father, the debt collectors. The letters she'd ignored from men wanting to buy her land. For the first time, it all began to fit together. The threats. The strange men who'd come through town asking questions. The sudden raids nearby. "Someone paid them," she said quietly. "Someone wants me gone." The warrior didn't answer, but the way his hand tightened around the rifle told her he agreed. The wind shifted, carrying a distant sound, the faint rustle of movement beyond the trees. The warrior froze, his head tilting slightly. Then he stood in one smooth motion, signaling the others to douse the fire. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders," he said. "Too many to count." The night swallowed the light, and in the darkness, she could hear the steady beat of approaching hooves. Her pulse quickened as she tried to make out the shapes in the distance. The warrior moved closer to her, placing a hand on her arm. "Stay behind me," he said again, his voice low but firm. She didn't argue this time. The riders came into view, shadows against the starlit sky, their torches flickering like ghosts. The men around her gripped their weapons, waiting for a signal. The warrior's gaze stayed fixed on the ridge, his body still as stone. When the first torch hit the ground, bursting into flame, the truth hit her like a blow. They hadn't come to steal. They'd come to burn everything left. The warrior stepped forward, his voice cold and steady. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The leader's laughter carried across the night, cruel and mocking. "That's the plan, Apache." The woman's heart pounded as the firelight caught the edge of the warrior's blade. He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see his face one more time, calm, fierce, and ready for whatever came next. And as the first flames reached the edge of the trees, she finally understood what kind of man had ridden into her life that morning. Not a stranger, not just a protector, but someone whose fight had started long before he ever found her. The night exploded in fire and noise once more. And this time, there was no running. The firelight flickered across the canyon walls, casting long, jagged shadows that danced like specters in the night. The woman's hands trembled around the reins as the Apache warrior moved ahead of her, his silhouette steady against the flames. Around them, the ranch hands huddled together, eyes wide with fear, their voices low and frantic as they whispered strategies that amounted to nothing. She could hear the distant yells of the attackers, their horses pounding across the hard dirt, closer with every heartbeat. The warrior signaled for them to take cover behind a line of boulders. His calm, commanding presence seemed to ground the others, but she felt her own pulse hammering in her ears. The night had turned into a battlefield, and she realized the true danger wasn't the immediate chaos. It was what it meant, the threat that had been looming over her land for months. Now fully realized, from her vantage point, she could see the leader of the raiders. A tall man on a black horse, with a scar running across his cheek. He rode with a confidence born of cruelty, his eyes scanning the field for weakness. The woman swallowed hard. This was more than just a raid. It was a test. Someone powerful wanted her gone. And they weren't sending just ordinary men to get it done. The warrior crouched low, whispering instructions to the foreman and the other hands. "Hold your fire until you see the flash. Don't shoot at the horses. Only the men. Don't give them an excuse." His words were precise, leaving no room for error, and yet there was a tension beneath. his calm that the woman felt in her chest. She realized he had been through this kind of fight before, seen men die in ways that left no trace of mercy. One of the younger ranch hands, barely more than a boy, flinched and tried to move forward. The warrior's eyes caught him instantly. "You don't move unless I tell you," he said, his voice low, but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. The boy froze, nodding, and the woman felt a strange surge of admiration for the way he commanded. Respect, without raising his voice. She turned her attention back to the approaching riders. They had split into two groups, circling from different angles. The Scarface leader stayed back, letting his men advance first. The woman realized that someone had planned this carefully. They knew the terrain, the ranch, and now they were exploiting every advantage. Suddenly, a shout rose from one of the attackers. A torch was thrown toward the dry brush near the riverbed, igniting a small fire. The flames licked at the earth, smoke curling upward and carrying the acrid smell into her nose. Panic flared in the younger hands, and one moved forward instinctively. Stepping out from cover, the warrior reacted instantly, a blur of motion. He pushed the boy down and aimed his rifle, firing a single, precise shot. The man nearest the boy went down, clutching his shoulder, and the others hesitated. The silence that followed was sharp and tense. The woman felt her stomach twist. She had never seen death so close. "Not like this. This isn't just about cattle," the warrior muttered, almost to himself. "They want a message." She frowned, unsure what he meant. "A message for whom?" "Not for you," he said. His eyes scanned the ridge, the movement in the dark. "For whoever thinks they can take what isn't theirs? Whoever thinks you're weak." Her mind raced. Who had sent them? And why now? She had refused to sell her land to the men who had come before, men who promised gold and influence. But she hadn't thought it would come to this, that someone would orchestrate a raid meant to test her resolve. To terrorize her into compliance. The fire crackled and shifted with the wind. Shadows leaped across the rocks, making it hard to see the enemy clearly. The warrior moved silently among the men, repositioning them, spearing commands that seemed impossible to hear over the noise. She noticed that he didn't just react, he anticipated. He knew what the attackers would do before they did it. From behind the line, one of the men whispered to the foreman, "Who is he really?" The foreman shook his head. "Don't know. But I've seen a lot in my life, and I've never seen a man move like that." The woman's mind wandered briefly, thinking of her own family history. Her father had faced outlaws, rustlers, and rival ranchers. But he had never had to face this kind of coordinated, merciless threat. She realized that for all her strength and independence, she had been unprepared for the full scope of danger the frontier could bring. Aha! Sudden movement caught her eye, a rider darting between the rocks to flank their position. Without thinking, she lifted her own rifle, trained on the shadow. The warrior saw the motion from the corner of his eye and moved in front of her, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Let them come closer." The words made her skin crawl. She wanted to act, to protect herself, to shoot, but she obeyed. The warrior's patience was unnerving. She began to understand that he had a plan far bigger than she could yet see. The flanking rider paused, scanning the line of defenders. Then a sharp whistle echoed across the valley, and the rest of the raiders seemed to respond, gathering in tighter formation. The woman realized with a sinking heart that this wasn't a small attack. They'd come prepared, organized, and ruthless. She glanced at the warrior. His face was a mask of concentration. Jaw tight, eyes focused on the shadows beyond the firelight. His hand rested on the rifle, but his body was loose, ready to move at a moment's notice. She felt a strange pull toward him. Not just admiration, but something deeper. A reliance born of necessity and a growing trust she hadn't intended to give. The younger boy near her whispered a question, his voice barely audible. "Miss, what do we do if they get past him?" She swallowed hard, looking at the warrior. His eyes met hers, unwavering, and he gave a small shake of his head, almost imperceptible, as if to say, "They won't." But she could feel it, the unease that lingered in the air. The truth that even a man like him couldn't stop everything. She thought about her land, her ranch hands, and herself. All of it could be taken, burned, or lost in the blink of an eye. And the realization made her chest tighten with fear and determination at the same time. The fire flared higher as another torch landed near the edge of the brush. Sparks flew, drifting over the dry earth. The warriors of the attacking group shouted, urging their horses forward. The woman saw the flash of rifles as they prepared to fire. She caught her breath, knowing that in seconds, chaos would erupt again. The Apache warrior moved among them, positioning the men with a precision that left no room for error. She noticed that he wasn't just reacting to the immediate threat. He was watching the patterns, the movements, and the intentions of the attackers. Every gesture, every shift in the enemy's line. He anticipated. She wondered how much of his life had been spent preparing for this. How many battles he had fought and survived, carrying scars that weren't all visible. And in that thought, she realized something frightening. He was more than a protector. He was a force of nature, shaped by violence, loss, and survival. The leader of the raiders stepped forward, raising his rifle in the firelight. "Come out!" he shouted. "We know you're hiding. You can't run forever." The warrior stepped from behind the boulder, rifle raised, his voice carrying clear and firm. "You want to fight? You'll get it. But if you think you'll take her land, you're wrong." The leader laughed, a cruel, grating sound. "Land. We want more than land. We want to see her beg. And you'll watch, Apache." The words made the woman's stomach twist. She realized that this conflict wasn't just about property or cattle. It was about power, about fear, about sending a message. And now she was at the center of it. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint sound from the ridge, another group approaching. The woman's eyes widened. More attackers, more danger, more uncertainty. She looked at the warrior, who remained calm, though his eyes flicked to the new movement. "They're coming faster than I expected," he muttered. "We might have another fight before this night ends." Her hands tightened on the reins. The firelight reflected in her eyes, and for the first time, she felt a mixture of fear and determination she hadn't known she possessed. She realized that survival wouldn't be easy. She would have to rely on the warrior in ways she hadn't anticipated. The night deepened, fire casting long shadows across the canyon. The distant sound of hooves grew louder. The woman could see the silhouettes of riders emerging, their shapes blurred by darkness and smoke. Her heart raced. The Apache warrior adjusted his stance, his rifle ready, and then, just before the first clash could erupt, the night seemed to hold its breath. She knew, in that frozen moment, that the conflict wasn't just about land, or cattle, or survival. It was about trust, loyalty, and the lengths one would go to protect what mattered most. The first torch flared again, and the battle was about to begin. The night had grown thick and heavy, pressing down on the canyon as if the darkness itself was watching. Every shadow seemed to move with intent, and the crackling fire did little to keep the gloom at bay. The woman gripped the reins of her horse tightly, knuckles white, feeling the tension coiled through her body like a spring ready to snap. Around her, the ranch hands crouched behind boulders, eyes darting nervously, hands twitching toward weapons they scarcely knew how to use. The Apache warrior moved among them with the certainty of a man who had faced death countless times. His eyes scanned the dark outlines beyond the firelight, noting the slightest ripple of movement. His hands rested lightly on his rifle, but every muscle in his body was poised for action. He didn't speak much, but the silence itself carried authority. And the others instinctively followed his lead. From the ridge came a distant clatter of hooves. The attackers were organizing again, regrouping for another wave. The woman's heart thumped hard as she watched them, firelight revealing the glint of metal and the sharp edges of their intentions. She realized fully that this was more than a raid. It was a test of courage, of skill, of the limits of her own will to survive. A voice broke the quiet, low and urgent. "They're coming down the left flank," the foreman whispered, pointing to the shadowed canyon slope. The woman followed his finger and saw a cluster of figures moving with purpose toward the fire. Her stomach nodded. They were trying to encircle them, The warrior shifted, moving swiftly to intercept the threat. "Hold your positions," he ordered. "Do not fire until you see the flash. Wait for my signal." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing heart. The fire crackled, sparks dancing in the night, and for a moment the wind carried an almost deafening silence. Then came the first shot, sharp and ringing. The woman flinched. She saw one of the attackers stumble, clutching his shoulder, but the others surged forward, undeterred. The Apache warrior ducked behind a boulder, firing with calm precision. Each movement was deliberate, each shot measured. He wasn't just defending them. He was shaping the battle. One of the younger ranch hands whispered frantically, "Miss, I don't think we can hold them." The woman turned toward him, eyes wide. "Then we follow him," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. She realized she couldn't let fear rule her, not now. Not when everything she loved was on the line. The attackers pressed closer, the firelight catching their silhouettes as they spread out, forming a tightening circle. The woman could feel the urgency in every heartbeat, the growing pressure of being surrounded. She glanced at the warrior. He was a statue of calm amidst the chaos, his eyes scanning, calculating, anticipating. Suddenly, one of the attackers leapt forward, torch in hand, aiming to set fire to the remaining brush. The woman's horse reared, startled, and she nearly fell. The warrior reacted instantly, moving in front of her, raising his rifle and firing a single precise shot that sent the man sprawling to the ground. Sparks rained around them, and the smell of smoke filled the air. Breathing heavily, she realized the stakes had grown higher than ever. This was no longer just about protecting the ranch. It was about survival, about life and death in its rawest form. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet she stayed. Anchored by the presence of the warrior and the determination to see this through, another rider broke through the shadows, aiming straight for the group. The warrior stepped forward, blocking the path, and a gunshot echoed. The man fell from his horse, the animal bolting back into the darkness. The woman's pulse raced as she took in the scene. He was fearless, precise, and deadly. She had never seen a man command such control over chaos. The attackers weren't giving up. From the ridge came more movements, more shadows closing in. The woman realized that this was a coordinated effort, a relentless push to overwhelm them. Whoever had sent these men knew exactly what they were doing. And they wouldn't stop until they got what they came for. The warrior moved among the ranch hands, repositioning them, checking their rifles, whispering instructions. "Left flank, cover the fire. Right, watch the ridge. Don't let them get between us." His voice was calm, but the urgency behind it was unmistakable. She noticed the fear in the young men around her, the way their hands shook, the way they looked to him for guidance, and she realized something about herself. She wasn't just afraid. She was alive in a way she hadn't been before. Caught in the raw edge of danger, aware of every sound, every shadow, every breath. The attackers pressed closer, and she could see the glint of knives in the firelight. One of them threw a rock toward their position, and the woman ducked instinctively. The warrior fired again, taking down the man who had thrown it. She could feel the weight of each second, the tension stretching tight like a bowstring. From the ridge came a different sound, a whistle, sharp and commanding. The attackers seemed to pause, regrouping. The warrior's eyes narrowed. "They're signaling each other," he muttered. "They've been trained. This is no simple raid." The woman's heart sank. If this was planned, if every move had been anticipated, what chance did they really have? But the warrior didn't falter. He moved among them with fluid precision, adjusting positions, anticipating attacks before they came. She realized that his knowledge of combat was more than skill. It was instinct, honed through years of survival and battles she could barely imagine. A sudden movement to the right caught her eye. Another rider, faster than the rest, charging straight for them. The warrior spotted him too, raising his rifle in a smooth, practiced motion. A shot rang out, and the rider fell, his horse bolting into the shadows. The woman's breath came in short, sharp gasps. "Stay calm," the warrior said, his voice steady but low, almost a whisper meant only for her. "Watch, learn, survive. She nodded, gripping the reins tighter. Every nerve in her body was alive, every sense heightened. She could hear the pounding of hooves, the whispers of wind through the canyon, the distant calls of the attackers. The night had become a living, breathing enemy, full of shadows and threats that could strike at any moment. Another rider tried to circle behind their line. The warrior didn't hesitate. He signaled to one of the ranch hands, who fired, and the man fell, scrambling to stay upright. The woman felt a mix of awe and fear. She had never seen such precision in action. Never understood how one man could command so much control in the midst of chaos. The fire flickered and hissed as another torch landed nearby. Sparks rained around them, threatening to ignite the dry brush. The woman's horse jerked, snorting, and she struggled to keep it calm. The warrior moved beside her again, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "Easy, stay with me." She followed him, heart racing, mind alert. She realized that in the moments between shots, between movement and counter, they were not just fighting for survival. They were testing the limits of their endurance, their courage, their will to protect what mattered most. From behind, a shout rose. The Scarface leader had broken from the main group and was advancing with a small contingent, moving fast and striking with brutal intent. The woman could see the gleam of his knife in the firelight, the cruel curve of his smile. She knew this man wouldn't stop until he had taken everything they were defending. The warrior stepped forward to meet him, rifle raised, eyes locked on the threat. The air seemed to thrum with tension, every second stretching unbearably long. Around them, the ranch hands froze, caught between fear and the instinct to follow his lead. The woman's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed danger, yet she remained rooted by a strange mixture of trust and fear. She realized that what they faced now was not just a battle of weapons, but a test of strategy, courage, and willpower. The scar-faced leader stopped a few yards away, raising his knife high. The warrior's hand rested on the rifle, finger on the trigger, eyes cold and unflinching. Sparks from the fire danced around them, and the night seemed to hold its breath. The woman gripped the reins, horse shifting nervously beneath her. She could see the tension in the air, the weight of what was about to happen. This was the moment where all their preparation, all their fear, and all their determination would collide. From the ridge, she could hear the whispers of the remaining attackers, moving closer, circling, waiting for the signal. The night had grown darker, heavier, more oppressive, and every second stretched into a lifetime. The warrior's eyes flicked to her briefly, just enough to meet hers. There was no fear there, only certainty. And in that moment, she realized that everything depended on what happened in the next heartbeat. The Scarface leader lunged, knife flashing, and the warrior's body moved with fluid precision. The other attackers surged forward, hooves pounding, guns raised. The fire crackled, sparks scattering into the night. The woman's breath caught. She knew the climax of this night was unfolding, that nothing would ever be the same again. And in the darkness, with the air thick with smoke and tension, every heartbeat felt like a countdown. The battle, the danger, the unknown, it all teetered on the edge, ready to explode into the most intense moments yet. The clash erupted like a storm, the night bursting with the sound of gunfire, shouted commands, and the pounding of horses' hooves. The Apache warrior moved with precision, meeting each attacker head-on. Every shot and movement deliberate, every step calculated. The woman watched, her hands gripping her reins so tightly that her knuckles ached, but she didn't move. She could see the chaos swirling around them, men falling, horses rearing, flames licking the edges of the dry brush. And yet, in the center of it all, he remained a force of unshakable calm. The Scarface leader lunged forward, knife raised high. The warrior sidestepped smoothly, driving the barrel of his rifle forward to knock the man off balance. The attacker stumbled, tripping over a rock, and the warrior fired a quick, controlled shot, sending him sprawling to the ground. Around them, the remaining riders hesitated for a heartbeat, uncertainty flashing across their faces. The woman realized then it was that moment of hesitation that would decide the battle. The warrior had forced them to doubt, to reconsider, to calculate risk against reward. That pause, brief as it was, allowed the ranch hands to steady their aim and return fire. One by one, the attackers fell back, the chaos beginning to shift in favor of the defenders. She saw the younger boy she had worried about earlier fire his rifle and hit one of the fleeing riders. Another ranch hand managed to push back a man who had gotten too close to the fire. Each small victory felt monumental, and she realized that survival wasn't just about courage, it was about teamwork. About following someone who knew the terrain, the threat, and how to turn fear into action. The remaining attackers started to retreat toward the ridge, realizing that their numbers alone wouldn't be enough to overwhelm the warrior and the ranch hands. The Apache man didn't pursue immediately. He kept a steady eye on their movements, making sure none tried to circle back. His control over the chaos was complete, and yet there was no celebration in his movements, only focus, discipline, and vigilance. The woman's heart slowed gradually as the danger receded. Though she could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, she dismounted, moving toward the warrior as the last of the attackers vanished into the shadows. "It's over," she whispered, almost afraid to break the silence. He didn't speak immediately. He moved among the men, checking on wounds, making sure everyone was accounted for. When he finally turned toward her, the firelight revealed the exhaustion etched into his features, the dust and sweat streaking his skin. "For now," he said softly, "but they won't forget." Her chest tightened, but she nodded, understanding. The battle had been won, yet the war of survival, of keeping her land, of maintaining the fragile peace in a frontier world was ongoing. She had learned something essential that night. Strength wasn't only in firepower or courage. It was in vigilance, in resilience, and in knowing who to trust. The foreman approached, brushing dirt and ash from his jacket. "I never thought we'd see morning," he said, shaking his head. "If it weren't for him—" He gestured toward the Apache warrior, trailing off in awe. The woman stepped closer to the warrior. "I still don't know your name," she said. He shook his head with a faint smile. "Names don't mean much here. You can call me what you like." She considered this, then nodded. "Call you. Protector, then. Because that's what you are." Gave a small, wry smile. "Protector, then." The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke in the night air. The stars reflected softly off the canyon walls, and the firelight that had once danced violently now settled into a quiet glow. Around them, the ranch hands began to move with purpose, assessing damages, tending to the wounded, and restoring what could be salvaged from the chaos. The woman walked among them, her eyes lingering on each familiar face. Realizing that the bonds forged under fire were stronger than any contract or agreement, trust had been built in the heat of battle, and it was trust that had saved them all. She glanced at the Apache warrior who stood apart, scanning the dark horizon as if anticipating further threats, and she felt a quiet gratitude she hadn't known she could carry. Night fully embraced the canyon, and the adrenaline slowly ebbed from her body. She sank to her knees by the fire, her hands in the warm glow, feeling the pulse of life around her. The horses nickered softly, the men whispered among themselves. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. The warrior approached and stood silently beside her. He didn't speak, only handed her a canteen of water. She took it, her hands trembling slightly, and offered him a small nod of thanks. His eyes met hers, and she saw something in them, not just the sharpness of a fighter, but the weight of a man who had carried responsibility and loss across many miles, many battles, and many lifetimes. "You saved all of us tonight," she said softly. He shook his head. "We saved each other. Every one of you stood when it mattered. That's what makes the difference." She studied him, realizing that this was more than a fight for survival. It was a test of humanity, courage, and the strength that comes from standing together against a world that was often cruel and unrelenting. She understood now that leadership wasn't just about skill. It was about trust, about giving others a reason to fight alongside you when everything seemed lost. The first hints of dawn touched the sky, softening the darkness with streaks of gold and pink. The aftermath of the battle lay across the canyon, scorched brush, trampled earth, and the remnants of a chaos that had threatened to consume them all. Yet in the quiet light of early morning, she felt hope. The Apache warrior turned to her finally. "You need to rest. There's still work to do, but you won't survive it without strength." She nodded, feeling the exhaustion settle into her bones. But she also felt a spark of resolve, a determination that had been tempered in fire and proven under pressure. She would protect her land, her people, and the life her father had fought to build. And she knew without doubt she wouldn't face it alone. As they began to move back toward the ranch, assessing the damage and organizing repairs, she reflected on the night's events. The fear, the courage, the strategy, the trust, it all had a lesson. Survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about seeing the truth, standing firm when the world pressed in, and recognizing the allies who would stand with you when every choice mattered. The ranch hands followed her lead. Inspired by the presence of the warrior and by her own quiet determination, even those who had doubted her strength now understood that leadership was as much about resilience as it was about authority. And though the threat hadn't vanished completely, the attackers could return, and new dangers could rise. They had proven something vital: that the land and the people who cared for it were not easily conquered. As the morning sun warmed the canyon, the woman and the warrior stood together on the porch of the ranch house. The air was still heavy with smoke, but the chaos of the night had passed. She looked at him, noticing the tired lines on his face, the way he carried himself with both strength and quiet grace. "Will they come back?" she asked, voice soft but steady. He nodded slowly. "Possibly. But now you know what it takes to face them. You and your people have the strength to withstand it." She took a deep breath, the morning air filling her lungs. "And if they do, then we stand again," he said simply, and she realized that those words carried more weight than any rifle or fire could. It was the resolve to keep going, no matter the cost, that had carried them through the night. She felt a sense of gratitude, not just for the victory, but for the understanding she had gained about herself, about courage, and about the value of trust and loyalty. She realized that the Apache warrior had not only protected them physically, but had shown her the depth of strategy, foresight, and heart it took to survive on the frontier. The ranch was quiet now, the chaos replaced with a cautious calm. The men repaired fences, tended horses, and shared quiet conversations about the night's events. The woman walked among them, acknowledging each effort, feeling the bonds of community strengthened by the ordeal. She understood that life on the frontier demanded not only strength, but collaboration, resilience, and unwavering courage. The warrior remained nearby, silent and watchful, a presence that had become more than protection. He was a reminder that survival depended not just on strength, but on wisdom, anticipation, and trust. She realized that some battles were fought with courage alone, while others required insight and restraint, and that night had demanded both as the sun climbed higher. Painting the canyon with light, the woman felt a quiet peace settle over her. The land was still hers, the people around her still alive, and the lessons of the night had left an indelible mark on her spirit. She knew there would be more challenges, more threats, more moments that would test her resolve. But she also knew that she had faced darkness and fire and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The warrior moved beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon one last time before he allowed himself a moment of rest. She looked at him and, for the first time, said the words aloud that had been forming in her mind since the night began. "Thank you," she said simply. He gave a faint nod, almost a smile. "It was never just me. We faced it together." And in that quiet moment, with the ranch beginning to breathe again under the morning sun, the woman understood the truth of survival on the frontier, that courage, trust, and resilience were the strongest weapons anyone could wield, and that even in the face of darkness, hope could still take root and flourish. The day began not with the echo of gunfire, but with the quiet promise of life continuing, lessons learned, and the unspoken bond between those who had stood firm when everything hung in the balance. The woman knew that the Apache warrior's presence had changed more than the outcome of a single night. It had reshaped her understanding of strength, loyalty, and the power of standing together. And as they looked across the canyon, the wind carrying the scent of smoke and dust away, the woman felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing she would never face it alone.